welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let some people get logged in. Um, and yeah, welcome. And while we actually wait for people to log in, I always like to ask a couple questions. I mean, this whole exciting journey to college, we're going to be focused on your kids, of course, but I always like to ask parents. Let's talk about you for a second. How you holding up? Are you ready for summer for your kids to come back from summer? Or what's I think actually is a better question is since we're talking about college, how about everyone put in the chat? Tell us which where did you go to college? Where are you an alumnus from? I'd like to always kind of get a sense of that. See if there's any schools that Dan and I know. So yeah, put it in the chat. Let us know where you're from. What schools you went to, colleges you went to. Okay, all right. Dharma. Okay. All right. All
Nice
right.
flex.
Yeah.
Not a bad list so far.
Yeah, it's solid. Okay. All
Nice
right.
variety.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I see a lot of schools that I have kids, constantly applying to, going to. I see. I kind of want to ask Mary a question. Did you go like do a undergrad and a master's? I see two schools there, or oh well, Karen just taught me three schools. Okay, all right. Uh, very cool. All right,
Great.
right on. Oh! Here we go. Getting close to where I sort of. It's kind of between where Dan lives and where I grew up. I think there, University of Michigan.
Yep.
Great
All
Just
school.
right.
wasn't smart enough to get in there, so I had to go to one.
That's fine. Love it.
Oh, good stuff. All right.
Shall we kick this off, gentlemen?
Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this.
Awesome. Good evening, or from wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for our great session today. I apologize for my video not being on, but hopefully you can hear me okay. For those who don't know, my name is Randy Joes. I'm one of the Associate Directors of College Counseling at the Cambridge School of Weston. So very excited to be here with our great partners from College A Pro. Just wanted to set the scene for today, right? This is a special presentation on sort of the ins and outs of a bit of the college process, but more importantly, the financial aid process in partnership with our friends at College A Pro. For families who are in the midst of the college search, which most, if not all of you are on, you can imagine the financial aid piece is a pretty layered, complicated, maybe at times stressful, and in a way a very personal part of the process. And so we hope tonight can serve as a great starting place in getting the conversation going surrounding what financial aid looks like for you and for your family. Just please be in contact with your college counselor for continued guidance around not only financial aid, but also just the entire college process as we wrap up the academic year at CSW and head into the summer months there. So with that, I'll turn our attention to our friends Dan and JP to kick us off for our presentation this evening. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And JP, Dan, take it away.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we're excited to be here. Just a quick little intro about College A Pro is an organization out of Boston area that is been really, I would say, was organized or formed out of this. Let's call this the crisis that we're in as a country when it comes to student debt, and ultimately, what we are trying to help our family be is a smarter shopper when it comes to college and figuring out that how financial aid works, how it can help make schools maybe more affordable, or maybe steer away from the schools that are just simply unaffordable, and knowing ahead of time. As we say, it's better to know before you go. So with that, before I share the screen, Dan, do you want to share a little bit about you?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Dan Maga. I'm out in the Chicagoland area. Um, and I've been working with families for about 20 years on the financial side of things. So focusing on and working with mom and dad on the financial aspect of how they're going to pay for college in the most efficient manners and kind of guiding them through this arduous process that you guys are about to face. So hopefully, over the next hour, JP and I are going to be able to educate you so you're going to have a good base of knowledge as to where to start and how to attack this with your kids.
Yeah, and as far as me, uh, I was the director of financial aid at the University of Southern California, like 25 years ago, and I've I helped co-launch in California the Student Aid Commission's college for cash for college program, and it's still being used now 20 plus years later. And I mean, I've literally have done presentations at the LA Convention Center where we bust in tens and tens of thousands of students over a couple of days, and just ever since then I've been trying to help families just qualify for as much financial aid as possible, and make sure that we're again finding schools that fit our budget, if you will, and being on track in that regard. So as we get into this, um, I'm just a little bit of housekeeping. I think is if you have questions, can you just um, make sure you put them in the Q&A, and that way Dan and I it can kind of monitor it a little closer and keep an eye on it, and then there'll be a couple times where we'll have special information for you that we'll put in the chat for you. But if you have questions, just as we go through, just put it in the Q&A for us. Um, Through the very generous arrangement with CSW, uh, you are being gifted what we call premium access to our software called MyCap, and so here's the QR code for you. But uh, we'll put it in the chat, the actual link where you can sign up if you haven't already done so. I'll put it here, or
I
oh,
pulled it
Dan
in. You're good.
Dan beat me. Dan's on it. Um, but this is you we'll demo it a little bit later here, but this is kind of going to be what I say helps level the playing field when it comes to this game that we play with colleges, as far as how to pay for it, and like am I getting a good deal and all that. It's one of the most powerful tools is going to be available to you. So let's kind of just before we get into financially, let's just kind of make sure we understand some context of this journey that we're on. Uh, so I think of it like this: your children, they're if they're all juniors, in about a year they're going to be uh, you know up, committing to a college. But before that they're going to be having to figure out, well, who do I apply to? We have like over 4,000 plus colleges in America. That's way too many to consider. That's just an unfeasible number. So I think of it as in terms of like, how do we narrow it down? And the way I always approach is like, well, let's first think about schools that are an academic fit. Do they offer the major that you want to study? Are you going to be with your academic peers? All that sort of stuff, and that's what your school counselors are going to help your child do is figure out that which schools are an academic fit. But then that still can be a very big list, and so then you narrow it down now by what's considered a financial fit, and that means we know your budget, and then we find the schools. You shop for the schools that are going to fit your budget. That might mean they just have an affordable sticker price, or that might mean we can qualify for enough financial aid to help bring that sticker price down to fit your budget. So that's what we're going to be helping with, and it's showing how to use the software to help you do that. And then there's what I call the emotional fit, the I wants, for your child. And at that stage, you're kind of good. Like if you hand them a list of schools where it was an academic fit and a financial fit, you're not too worried about what schools they pick from there based upon their I wants, because they're kind of good choices. But you help them get it down to like that top. I call it top 10 because I grew up with David Letterman. But from there they apply to those schools. So again, that's kind of the big broad brushstrokes, this journey that you're going to be going on in the next 12 months, if you will. And so again, the focus of tonight is going to be this financial fit and financial aid specifically. So let's just kind of get into what is financial aid. And the way I always want parents to think about this is, so you have to understand is colleges artificially inflate their sticker price, and then they use financial aid to try to recruit students. An example I give is, let's say it really only costs $20,000 a year to educate your child, put them in a dorm room, but the sticker price is 60. So if they give you financial aid of 20 and lower their price tag down to 40, it's going to feel like you're getting a great deal. Arguably, in some ways, you're not paying 60, but again, the school clearly made a ton of profit in this scenario. This is, a very big business industry. It's $1 trillion business industry. But this is what they do. They use financial aid as a way to recruit your child to come to their school. So it's a discount. It's a discount. So as far as the types of financial aid, think of it as, three buckets of money. Uh, First one is going to be grants. And this is going to be awarded based upon a financial need. And in other words, we're going to fill out financial aid applications, and it's going to determine your financial profile. And we love grants because they're free money. We don't have to pay it back. The other bucket we love is scholarships, and that's going to be awarded based upon some measure of your students' talent, if you will, some measure of maybe their academic talent, like scored really high on an SAT score or high GPAs. Maybe it's athletic talent. Maybe it's performance, like musical talent, whatever. It can be a variety of things that they how they measured that talent. But again, it's free money, and we like free money. So the third type, though, the third bucket, if you will, financial aid, we'll take it, but it's not what we're super excited about by any means. It's going to be the loans and the work study. It's not free money. Loans, I think we understand. You borrow and you have to pay it back with interest. But so when we talk about, how do we use financial aid to help bring the sticker price down, we're technically referring to the grants and the scholarships, the free money. We want to figure out how to maximize that free money to bring that cost down to us. So, as far as who gives out financial aid, again, I basically say there's about four sources. About 45% comes from the federal government, about 35% comes from the colleges themselves, about 9% comes from the states, and about 11% comes from private resources. Now, as an example, state of Massachusetts. I mean, I think of Wizard of Oz here: grants, scholarships, loans. Oh my, the state of Massachusetts offers it all. Last I counted, I believe you have 8 grant programs, 10 scholarship programs, 16 tuition waiver programs, and one no interest loan program. And so I'll just say I'll send you in the chat here a link of, I'll try to find it here, or maybe if Dan has it, we'll send it in the chat. But take a look at what these different kind of financial aid programs exist from the state itself. Now, what I really want to kind of get into is need-based financial aid. This is going to be what I call the fundamental formula to financial aid. This is going to be what probably has the most impact as to what college will end up costing most families. And it's just on face value here is a simple algebra equation, right? We have the cost of attendance, the sticker price, that's tuition, room, board, uh, incidentals that they don't charge, but they just know that you would incur, like transportation costs to and from college, a little bit of fun money, not much, but it's the incidentals plus their direct costs. So all of that combined is their cost of attendance, the sticker price. You subtract from that what's called the student aid index. Now, this is kind of like your financial profile. You're going to fill out financial aid forms, and they're going to calculate your student aid index. And in very generic terms, I'll say there are 4 components that determine your student aid index. One is students' income. The second would be students' assets. The third is parents' income, and the fourth is parent assets. Those broad brushstrokes, those are the 4 things that are going to go in and determine your SAI. Okay, and You subtract the SAI from the cost of attendance, and that tells us how much you need for financial aid. And if you're picking schools that are very generous, they will try to meet your need 100% hopefully, and they're going to go through the federal resources, the state resources, and their resources to try to meet your need. Ideally, and if the school's got the funding, they'll meet it 100%, but not all schools do. um, Again, face value seems like a pretty simple formula. In truth, there's a lot of moving parts behind this. This is an actual college course, just this topic alone. That student aid index formula, if I were to print it out, it is 69 pages long. If you were to try to print out the rules that go behind the determination on what schools are allowed to do or not allowed to do, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages long. Um, there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I think the primary thing I would want every family to walk away with is simply this old adage: don't assume anything when it comes to financial aid. Don't assume you make too much and you won't qualify. I can't tell you how many times I've had parents tell me, "Oh, we won't qualify for financial aid," and we run the numbers. I'm like, "You actually do." Don't assume you don't, especially just because your friends or family didn't. Chances are they did it wrong. 3 out of 4 families do fill out this stuff out incorrectly. Um, so don't assume you won't qualify for financial aid. The opposite is also true. Don't assume you'll get everything in financial aid. Again, not all schools offer the money. I've held counseled families where they had a super low SAI calculation, and therefore they needed almost everything. And the schools they picked didn't give them anything because the schools just didn't have the funding. Again, this is about knowing ahead of time what you think the cost will end up being, and that's where this College Aid Pro, where we're going to come in and show you ahead of time. But this is, again, what I'm going to call that fundamental formula to financial aid, the fundamental formula that's really going to kind of dictate how expensive college will be for you. So some tips I'm going to share about the SAI. Again, back when I was the director of financial aid, I wasn't necessarily allowed to share this information publicly, but I'm no longer in that position, so I'm going to share with you publicly. This is going to be some of the information that can potentially save you thousands and thousands of dollars. Again, I said in general, the SAI is comprised of 4 components. The student's income and assets, parents' income and assets. So let's first talk about assets. Again, student assets are assessed at a much higher rate than a parent asset will be when calculating the SAI. A student asset is going to be assessed at between 20 to 25% of whatever the value of their asset is. So, like a UGMA, a UTMA, if they have money in their own savings account, let's say, um, that's going to get assessed at like 20 to 25% when calculating that SAI. An asset that's in the parent's name, though, the net assessment, I'll word it that way, net assessment is 5.6%. So significantly less. So ideally, if there's ever situations where we have a lot of student assets, maybe we want to figure out how to move it over to a parent asset. Um, Other things to think about. What if it's, let's say, a grandparent asset, meaning a grandparent, because I see this a fair off time, grandparents set up a 529. Well, on at least for FAFSA, and Dan will talk more about the FAFSA, but we don't have to report that on the federal application. It's was neither a student nor the parent asset, so we don't report that. The other things to consider, or actually, let me say, is one of the common mistakes I see when you fill out the financial aid forms. It'll say, like, tell us the value net worth of your investments, and a lot of families erroneously include their retirement accounts as part of that investments. So, like a 401k, an IRA, a Roth, etc. Those, in small little print, it'll say do not include those things. So, but I often see, where parents are rushing through and they don't read the small print. and they include their retirement accounts as well. So you don't include your retirement accounts as an asset. That's off the table, if you will. Um, they will ask about real estate somehow, some way, um, but it depends on which kind of real estate we're talking about. If we're talking about your primary home, the FAFSA technically doesn't ask. They'll ask what's the value of real estate, but again, in small little print, they say do not include your primary home. But if you have a secondary home or just land or anything like that, maybe bought a house for the in-laws, the FAFSA is going to ask about that. You do include that. The CSS profile, another application that might get asked for, you have to report both your primary home and any secondary residences. Um, Business owners, we now have to report the value of your business. And I think just as a general rule, what I tend to find is parents are overzealous and trying to be over truthful, and therefore sometimes over report values of real estate or values of business. And in instead of approaching it from the mindset of like, hey, if I had 6 months and I could optimize the best price possible for this stuff, don't approach financial aid forms that with that mindset. Reverse it, going, okay, more of like a fire sale. If I had to sell in the next 30 days, what's the lowest base price I could reasonably take? Think of it in that terms when you're trying to figure out what's the worth of a business or real estate. Okay. So just tips that I'm going to say when it comes to thinking about the asset side of the when it calculating the SAI. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention is the time frame. The applications are going to say, tell us the value of these assets on the day you're filling out the forms, right? So it's going to be that present day at that time when you're filling out the forms. So if you got a lot of assets that are earmarked for something down the road, maybe you spend those assets down and get whatever it is that they're earmarked for, so that you don't have to report them. So little things about that go into that when you're calculating that SAI. Let's talk about income for a second. The income is going to be based upon what we call prior year. So for parents here of juniors, you're going to be class of 2025. They're going to import your 2023 tax return information. So it's essentially 2 years behind. So we call it the prior year. When it comes to income, they're basically going to look at three things. They're going to look at your AGI, line 11 of your tax return. They're going to subtract from that your taxes paid, line 22 of your tax return. Then they're going to subtract a little itty bitty income protection for your expenses based upon the family size. And while this isn't exactly precise, it's super close though, it's probably going to be poverty guidelines for your family size. So like a family of three, it might that income protection for your expenses might be about 35,000. Not that any of us are going to live off of 35,000 on a family of three, but that's about how much they protect. They don't ask about your actual expenses. They're just going to give you a little protection based upon the family size. So they're going to, again, take your AGI, subtract out your taxes paid, and subtract out this little income protection. That's going to be your available income that they use to calculate your SAI. Students' income, though, if your student's working, if your child's working, they can earn up to about $9,400 and it have no impact on their student aid index. So, but that's kind of how the income plays into it as well. But just always remember, it's about 2 years behind. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dan, and he can talk about merit aid.
Yeah, so merit aid. Now, the good news about merit aid, this has nothing to do with your finances. So, unlike financial aid or need-based grants, it's going to take into account your income, your assets, that sort of thing. Merit is completely different. It has nothing to do with finances. Is purely based on a student's merit. The most common, I would say, is academic merit scholarships, which are typically tied simply to the student's GPA and or test scores. But you can also get merit scholarships if you're in the band, art, things of that nature. So it can be anything. But the key is it's not related to your finances. And if you get an academic merit scholarship, generally speaking, it will be fixed over the 4 years. So you can kind of set your watch to it, knowing that you're going to get that, or your student's going to get that scholarship every year. And usually there is a minimum GPA requirement to keep that scholarship. But although merit scholarships are not typically tied to financial aid, there are some that still require you complete the financial aid form. So you're still going to want to be prepared to complete the FAFSA and possibly the CSS profile when your students start applying here in the fall, even if you, as JP said, don't think that you're going to qualify for need-based grants. So just yet another reason why we're huge proponents of everyone should be completing these forms regardless. And there's some schools out there, like the Ivy League schools are, I would say, the most popular ones, that do not offer merit scholarships to anyone. So it doesn't matter how smart your student is, you get into Harvard, Dartmouth, one of those, there are not scholarships to be had. The only money that they're going to offer is through need-based grants. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you just to go through a quick little tutorial on how this MyCap software works. Hopefully, everyone was able to go to the link, maybe even set up their own account. But I'm going to show you, just give you a brief example of kind of how this looks. So here we are in the profile. Whoops, let's get back here. Okay, here we go. So we've got Vivian, who's my oldest. And you can see here at the top, after you've filled out your profile, which you can do in the top right-hand corner, it tells you the federal student aid index. So that's going to be for schools like Maryland, UMass Amherst, Vermont. And then the institutional SAI, this is going to be for the schools that require that CSS profile. Penn, Boston College, Northeastern, Boston University, they would fall into that category. The reason there's a range for the institutional, not the federal, is because some schools that use the institutional, or I should say most, are going to take into account your home equity, and some value it more than others. So if you're wondering why is there a range there on my screen, that's why some schools look at that home equity differently. And then when you scroll down, I just picked a couple schools here for this example. For Maryland, UMass, and Penn, it tells you the sticker price of the schools, and then your net expected price after not only financial aid, but it's also taking into account academic merit scholarships. So when you're filling out your profile, you're going to put in brief financial information on yourself, as well as information on your student, grade, test scores, that sort of thing. That way, when you plug in the schools, it's going to anticipate not only what type of grants you can expect, but potentially merit scholarships. So for Penn, you click on the more info, and it's going to detail this student is expecting $69,000 in need-based grants to get their net cost down to $23,000. So although Penn for this student, far more expensive than going to Maryland or even in-state UMass, for this family it was actually cheaper to send their kid out of state to Penn. And again, depending on your situation, that may not be atypical. And then you can also search for other schools. So you click on the search tab, just for an example. Let's say we're looking for schools that offer a biology major, and we're going to look at 4-year schools only. We want to find schools within 500 miles, schools that are ranked, and let's say schools that will offer a scholarship. And then you can hit the search button, and then it's going to populate all of the options that fall into that category. And then you can click to find out more information. You can add them to your list, so on and so forth. So you can go through all these different filters to try and get a better idea if you're trying to search for schools within a specific budget based on either need-based grants or academic merit scholarships. And the more accurate you are with inputting your information into the profile, the more accurate your results are going to be. So this can be a great tool to help you when trying to figure out, before your kids start applying here in a few months, not only what these schools cost that they're considering, but what you can actually anticipate in receiving back in the form of grants and scholarships. Okay, now, JP, do I hit stop share? Is that how I get back to the presentation? Or, oh, thank you. There. Yeah, I love JP. He takes care of everything for me. So, okay. What if I don't qualify for grants or scholarships? Value schools. So obviously you can search, and the MyCap software is going to do this. You can just be looking at schools based on their sticker price, um, as well as you may be looking at schools like a pathway program where you're going to a junior college for 2 years to save some money, and then they automatically are accepted into the state university for the last 2 years. So it can be a great way to save some money for the first two, and then pay for that 4 year education the last 2 years. Um, and then sometimes these schools that have honors programs, sometimes you're just, it's preferred classes, that sort of thing. But there's other times when you're going through those honors programs and there's monetary money available too, right? So they're adding extra scholarships available through those honors programs to the kids who qualify. And that depends on the college. But that can be another way where, focusing on the student's academic merits can help give you discounts if potentially you don't qualify for need-based grants. Okay, when applying for financial aid, and again, software is going to do a good job of telling you this, but no two schools are alike, right? If you start using the software and plugging things in, you're going to see that everything's different. So the last thing you can do is start making assumptions here. Like JP mentioned, we can't just assume, oh, my SAI is low, great. No matter where my kid applies, I'm going to get tons of grants. That may not necessarily be the case. Generally speaking, the private schools are going to do a better job of offering need-based grants than the public schools. So especially at those large public universities out of state, you may not necessarily want to assume they're going to throw a bunch of grant money at you, even if you have a low SAI. That's typically not going to happen. And then in terms of applying for aid, every school requires the FAFSA. So junior college to Harvard and everybody in between, they're all requiring the FAFSA. And then there's another form called the CSS profile. There's a couple hundred schools out there that utilize it that will require the CSS on top of the FAFSA. BU, BC, Northeastern, a couple examples of schools that would fall into that category. And one of the most confusing things out here is every school kind of is on a different timeline. So you have to make sure that you're meeting all these deadlines, but there's no universal deadline because it depends on the school and then how the student applied. Early decision, early action, regular decision. So it's on you to go to the college's financial aid website to find out, based on how your student's applying, when you have to complete all this stuff by. Generally speaking, I'd say if the kid is applying early decision, the financial aid forms are going to be due mid-November, early action, mid-December, regular decision, January, February. You also can't assume that the financial aid deadlines are the same as the admissions deadlines. They can be different. And some schools are more proactive about telling you that than others. So a lot of this, again, is following on you to understand the deadlines, what's required, and get all the information off to the schools in time. So in terms of the FAFSA, typically it goes live in October. This year it went live at the end of December, basically not till January. Next year, I think I've heard they said it's supposed to be October. I don't know that they've committed to a date yet, so that's kind of up in the air. But I think it would be safe to, let's assume it'll be ready in October for the 25-26 school year, but we're not quite sure on that yet. Like JP talked about, in terms of your income, they're going to be looking prior. So I think everyone on the call here is a junior. So they're going to be basing, your kid's freshman year's financial aid off of the income you earned in 2023. So if you haven't filed an extension, you've got that return filed, you can plug that information right into the MyCap formula. We're going to know really well what that SAI is because we kind of have all the information. And again, income 2 years back, assets though, as of the day you fill out the forms. So you can't fill this thing out for another 4 or 5 months. There may be strategies we can implement to help reduce that SAI before we start filling these out in the fall. Custodial parent submits the form. So if the parents are divorced, let's say, for example, mom and dad are divorced and mom provides a majority of the financial support, and mom is not remarried, then only mom's information is going to go on that FAFSA form. Nothing about dad or the ex-husband is going to be on there outside of any child support or alimony he may provide. But if the parents are divorced and not remarried, only one parent's information is going to go on that FAFSA. If mom was remarried in that example, then mom and the stepdad would, or her husband, they would have to be on that FAFSA form. So again, this is another place where a little strategy can come into play depending on the situation, income mom and dad are making if they're divorced, and who fills out the FAFSA. Remember, just because one parent is making more money than the other does not necessarily mean that that parent provided a majority of that student's financial support. And in order to submit the FAFSA, both the student and the parent are going to have to create what's called an FSA ID. So we've got the link here on the page. This is like a free account you'll set up through the studentaid.gov website. Mom, if she creates one for her, it's going to be using mom's name, date of birth, social, all that good stuff. The student, completely separate account. The kid's name, date of birth. So two completely separate accounts, and you'll need those logins before you can submit the FAFSA. And they do have to get verified by Social Security before they're active. So it does take a couple days to be after you create it for it to be ready to go. So a couple tips. I kind of just talked about two household families, right? There's in terms of if you're divorced, how that works. Again, the parent who provided a majority of the financial support, that's the parent that they want submitting the FAFSA. Unfortunately, with the new 24-25 FAFSA, they no longer take into account multiple kids in college at the same time. Previously, if you had two kids in college, they would just divide the SAI by the two kids. They no longer do that for the federal level, although most CSS profile schools who use the institutional methodology are still dividing that number by the multiple kids in college. Business owners. Previously, we did not have to report business value on the FAFSA if you had less than 100 employees. That has now changed. So similar to valuing your home, when you're valuing your business, I would be very conservative. And for a lot of businesses, the school's not going to really have any way to know what it's worth. So depending on your business and the situation, will depend on kind of how aggressive you could get in that scenario. But the last thing I'd be advising people to do is overvaluing their business, which could only potentially produce grants. And a majority of these changes for the 24-25 FAFSA are to help the lower income families. So it's supposed to be good. It's supposed to be helping these families get more federal and state grants. Although, JP and I could argue that I think the opposite is happening because the form was so confusing and hard to complete that not many people did it. But that's maybe another webinar for another day. But one of the good things is the 529 plans, you only have to include the student who's going to school. So previously, if you had two kids, you would have to report the total value of both 529s. That is no longer the case. You only have to report the value for the student that you're applying for financial aid. And as you may or may not know, you can move money between 529 beneficiaries tax and penalty free. So again, the assets are as of the day you fill out these forms. There's nothing precluding you from shifting money from Johnny's 529 to Bobby's before you fill out the FAFSA. So again, there can be some strategy there depending on the situation. And then one last thing here, 401k or 403b retirement account contributions or tax deductible ones. Previously, those contributions, the FAFSA would add it back in as what they call untaxed income. They're no longer doing that. So if you're, contributing to deductible 401k or 403b retirement plans, that income will not be taken into account on the FAFSA. But if the school requires the CSS profile, then they are going to add that back. So don't blanketly make the assumption, ooh, I'm going to sock a lot of money in my 401k and the schools aren't going to know about it. Some won't, but some will. It'll depend on the school. And talking about that CSS profile, again, this is for the schools like Northeastern, BU, BC, generally your higher priced private schools. Only a couple hundred of them out there. This form is a lot more intense than the FAFSA, a lot more questions, a lot more details. Um, the key one is the home equity. You don't have to report your home value in the FAFSA, but on the CSS, they're going to ask you, what year did you buy your house? What did you pay for it? What is the value today? And what is your mortgage? And the difference between the value that you estimate and the mortgage balance or the equity, they're going to look at it just like it's cash in your checking account. So again, if you have the unfortunate responsibility of completing this form, try and be as conservative as possible when you're valuing your house. Um, and if the parents are divorced, almost all schools that require the CSS profile, unlike the FAFSA, who only looks at one parent, they're going to look at both. So even if mom only had to submit the FAFSA and mom submitted the CSS, now they pull dad in this example, as the non-custodial parent, and he has to submit the non-custodial profile form. So for those schools, they're still going to look at both parents' finances to determine financial aid eligibility.
And if dad remarried, there's now like 4 parents income that's going into that.
And I will say the only two, and I don't know, JP might be able to add here, I don't know. The only 2 schools I found that kind of fit into that category, they require the CSS profile, they do a great job of providing grants, but they don't ask for the non-custodial profile form, would be University of Chicago and Vanderbilt. But other than those 2, almost every other one that I find, it seems like, want that non-custodial form.
What I have found is those schools, even though they don't use the CSS profiles version of the non-custodial parent form, they have their own internal version.
Yeah, it's most, if they figure if they want the CSS and you're divorced, there's good chance they're going to come after both parents. And for business owners here, there's a whole section that you're going to report all the details on your business: value, debt, receipts, expenses. It gets pretty intense. So as you can imagine, a lot more goes into this form and the information that you're going to have and need to fill it out. So there's a lot more room for error too. And these are the schools that usually are giving out the most money in terms of grants too. So it's really critical that you're doing this correctly, and putting yourself ideally as well in the best position to receive the max amount of money. You don't need an FSA ID for this one. It's a completely different website. It's at College Board, which generally is a website that works, which is nice, unlike the FAFSA one. And that you're going to use the student's College Board login information to set this up. Most kids set up their College Board accounts, when they're in high school to track ACT, SAT. It's the same account that you'll use for the CSS profile. Okay, ED, EA, and RD. So early decision, early action, regular decision. Early decision, that's the one where it's a binding agreement. You're applying to that school and you're saying, look, if my kid gets in, we're going to attend. And this is before you know if they're going to offer you any grants or scholarships. So it's a big risk in that sense of things. Generally speaking, you will get a leg up on admissions. It can be easier to get into these types of schools when applying early decision, but the downside financially is you have no leverage, right? You're going to see one offer. You don't know if it's good or bad, but you kind of have to take it. You're not going to get to see any of these other offers, because as soon as the kid gets accepted, you've got to rescind the other applications, and you're not going to hear back from those other schools. So I definitely suggest, if your student is looking at going that route, that you use the MyCap software to give you a good sense of, okay, if my kid applies here, what can I realistically expect to get in the form of grants or scholarships? So there isn't too many surprises. Early action, also you're applying early, but this one's non-binding. So the good news is you're applying early, you're getting decisions early, you're getting your kids, first foot forward, so to speak, for scholarships and everything else. But you don't have that binding agreement. The great thing about early action too, you do all that and then you're done, right? You're just done applying early, and then you can, move on, so to speak. And again, you don't have to worry about that binding agreement. And then regular decision, that's typically the last option in terms of the timeline. So for that one, usually, like I said, if you're thinking the financial aid deadline's November, December for EDEA regular decision, it may not be till January or February. Again, it's non-binding. Some schools don't offer early action; it's just early decision or regular decision. So, unfortunately, again, there's not a whole lot universal in this process. Every school is doing this differently. So, you'll definitely want to check the college's admission websites to see kind of what options your student has at that particular school based on what they offer from an admission standpoint. And then just be sure that you're following the financial aid deadlines for the same admission that they're going for. Okay, how to appeal. So for seniors, this is basically what they've probably been doing or should have been doing for the past couple weeks. If you've got juniors, you'll be doing this, next spring after the student has heard where they've been accepted and you have some offers. Um, there's a number of ways that you can appeal. One would be a change in financial circumstances. Mom, dad loses their job, or your income was reduced from 23 to 24. You had high medical expenses, or maybe you're supporting a grandparent financially. These are all things that you would need to bring to the college's attention so they can adjust the offer accordingly. But if none of that factors in and you've just got a bunch of different offers from a bunch of different schools, then it's how do you approach them for more money? And the good news is you can do that. And the worst they're going to do is say no. So there's no downside to asking a school for more money. It's just a question of how you go about doing it. I think if you're looking at a financial aid related appeal because of a financial hardship, lost job, something like that, it should be coming from the parent. But I think you can make the argument if the student received a scholarship and they're asking for a larger scholarship or more money. It could be powerful if the student is the one leading the charge with the appeal. And hey, I really want to go to your school. This is my number one choice. But my parents are only giving me so much money. Is there any way I can receive more scholarships to make this more affordable? That sort of thing. But you need to add some color to your story. You need to also let them know that that's really where your kid wants to attend. You need to show interest in that school. And you also want to be, you don't want to be annoying, but you want to be persistent, right? So it's a fine line there. But, again, I think a lot of people don't even realize you can ask for more money at these schools. Sometimes that's all it is you just taking the time to ask, and some schools will give it to you. The worst they're going to do is say no. But the other thing I will say is too, especially if you're reading like Facebook pages and stuff, and someone's like, ask for more money and you're going to get it. You got to have a reason, but it's not necessarily that simple. You can't just call up any college and they're going to fall over and give you an extra $20,000. So you've also got to kind of be realistic in how you approach this. And just because you feel like you should get more money, it may not necessarily work out that way. And remember, Boston College doesn't really care what University of Vermont does. If you're looking to try and compare a school's offers, you've got to find kind of similar type schools too. So, but again, I believe everyone should go through this process. It just depends on the situation and how you approach it to try and ask for more money. Okay, that's do we want to open it up to, do we have any questions, or where are we at with the Q&A?
I got the Q&A all caught up.
Okay.
I put in the chat just now. There's a link to a New York Times article that came out last week. Very good article that explains to parents what the landscape is nowadays for both admissions and financial aid with colleges. And this is written by a former senior advisor to the Department of Ed, so somebody who knows what he's talking about. And I think the most telling statement he made in that article, at least what's really stuck out to me, was he's like, pay attention. Colleges are paying consultants to figure out how to lure you and your child to come to their school and to get you to pay as much money as possible. And the analogy he uses that parents and students, they're playing a game of checkers while the college is playing a game of chess. And it's an unfair playing field. And so I think the best thing I can describe is that the software where that your school has set you up with, the premium version here of MyCap, this is you're going to be your best weapon to help level the playing field. Okay, utilize it. Seek counsel, seek guidance, get answers. Admittedly, I wouldn't seek answers from other parent groups because I find the amount of information in there wrong most of the time. Talk to the experts. You can book a 15-minute consult with us, and Dan, if you have the link, but you can book a 15-minute consult with us. We can do what I call like a financial aid checkup, a scholarship checkup. Make sure everything is firing the way it should be. You have things lined up the way you should. You're doing all that you should be to help bring the cost of college down. We can help just make sure you're on the right path, if you will. Another question I get asked often is, well, what about the school's net price calculators? If anyone's ever tried to use that, here's my 2 cents on that. Net price calculators were mandatorily, under the Obama administration, colleges were forced to put on a net price calculator. They were never forced, though, to make them accurate. And majority of schools use the most basic federal template for net price calculator, and it's usually about 5 questions, and it's extremely inaccurate. It's pretty much laughably worthless. So I would never use school's net price calculator. The data in the MyCap system will be much more accurate. It's more realistic of what we see, the schools, what they really do versus what they claim to do. Plus, there's just convenience factor. If you try to do net price calculator, it means you got to fill this out with, like, let's say, even if you just had 10 schools and you took 10 minutes for each school, that's an hour and a half of your time. If you do this in MyCap, you'll have the answers in about 10 minutes. So it's I think more realistic and more effective and more accurate to use the College A Pros software versus trying to do the net price calculators with the schools. I wouldn't trust that. Any thoughts from you, Dan, on that?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree on what you just said, especially because the time, right? I mean, once you fill out your profile, you can just add schools in a second through MyCap and just see what they're going to cost. Versus you start doing net price calc, you have to start from scratch every single time. Some of them won't take into account scholarship. It's just some of them, like you said, are just hot garbage. You'll see when you get on, and they're like, "This is from like 2017 to 18." You're like,
Oh yeah,
anyway.
I've seen that. Yeah.
I had one question come in. I figure we'll just answer this one live. Are colleges explicit about the fact that they are less likely to give you aid if you are accepted ED? Just wondering if you were inclined to appeal, whether they will be forthright about that or if they will want to appear like they are treating all applicants the same. So one, I would say they're not explicit or forthright with anything. So we can kind
Absolutely
of
not.
rule that
No,
out.
it's
Now,
it's what we see, but they're not. They
right
don't
now,
claim it.
I believe this depends on the school, meaning if you're applying early decision to like an Ivy, like a Dartmouth or a Penn or something like that, where there's no merit scholarships in play, um, I personally don't believe that the grants that they are going to, if the student qualified for need-based grants, I believe the grants they would give the ED kid would be the same that they would give the regular decision kid, which is all financially based. Um, but where I think it can be tough is you're applying to like a Tulane or a University of Miami, Florida, and a merit scholarship could be in play. Then the school, I feel like those schools are more likely to hold back on scholarships when they know that they can admit you or your student and you don't have a leg to stand on if they aren't offered any merit scholarship. And then there's nothing to compare it to. So um, it's definitely a risk. It's just, it also depends on your particular situation, how much age you qualify for, what the student is like, and what college we're talking about. All of those things factor into, if the ED makes sense for you. And then another question, what if I can't access the equity of my home due to low income and limitations of debt to income? They don't care.
And
Tell your
again, that's
house.
where it matters. Where the College A Pro site, the tool will help immensely because, again, if it's a FAFSA only school, they didn't ask about your home equity, fine, but those schools might not have as much financial aid to award. They might not be as generous. The schools that use the CSS profile that ask about it, some will take it into account, some won't. Again, there's no way to know for you to ever possibly know ahead of time, but all of that's baked into the computer software. Uh, but it's again, it's for me. I don't think we emphasize it enough. Is using the budget tool that's in there to kind of help you figure out your budget, and then stick to your budget. It's like, how do we find the schools that going to fit your budget? But again, that's something we can kind of go into more detail, like on a one-on-one, if you will. But we got to do the research ahead of time. Be proactive. Like I said at the beginning, don't assume anything, but be proactive, and let's do the research.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think obviously if anybody has any more questions, the next couple, pop them in there, we'll answer. But I would say, the next steps are obviously I think everyone here is a junior, so this is the perfect time to start figuring this out. We have all the information at hand to be able to accurately tell you what these schools are going to offer your student when they apply in the fall. Got your tax return, we know your kids' grades, scores, and you've got a couple of months before they're going to start applying. So if you want to better find out how we can help you, what we can do, where we can potentially save you money, click that the free consult link that I put in the chat, and you can schedule a meeting with JP or myself. We can go through your information, and when we meet one-on-one, give you a far better idea of kind of where you fit, talk strategy, and kind of advise from there on how we might be able to help you.
Yeah, and obviously every family is different. There's some families where I'm like, hey, you're already like, you're optimized, you're great. There's other families where I'm like, in 10 minutes, I'm like, I showed them how to lower their SAI by 20-30,000 a year, and which schools are going to give them that much more in grant money. So every situation's unique and different. I never make assumptions when I jump on a call. I assume my I guess assumption is this is a brand new situation, brand new case. Let's look at it with fresh eyes. Let's no stone left unturned, kind of a thing. But anyway, hope this helped everyone, and we'll be throughout the year be doing some more presentations. As we go through, kind of like the next steps with financial aid, and more about appealing, more about how to pay the bill when we get to that stage of the roller coaster ride. But I hope this initial broad brushstrokes kind of intro to financial aid, I hope it helps. And as always, just if you have questions, please let us know. All right. With that, I say good night, be well, and Dan, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.